A fresh week, a fresh episode of Business Morning. Good morning. It's going to be about an hour of business talks, and it starts right now.
Yep.
You're welcome. I'm Ini John Mekwa.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Ladi Williams. First conversation today, 1.87 trillion naira, that's the amount Nigeria recorded as trade deficit in the second quarter of this year, as the country spent 6.95 trillion naira on imports, which is higher comparative to 5.08 trillion naira spent on exports. According to the latest report released by the National Bureau of Statistics, the total merchandise trade of 12.03 trillion naira recorded within the second quarter was higher by 23.28% against the previous quarter and 88.71% year on year.
Well, India was top among the major countries with major export trading partners. They accounted for 18.7% of the merchandise trade, while China was the #1 import trading partner with a total of 29.91% of the transactions. Meanwhile, the report shows that crude oil, which accounts for 80.29% of total exports, rose sharply by 111.32% against the previous quarter to 4.07 trillion naira, while non-crude oil exports recorded 19.71% growth, or 1 trillion naira of total exports within the period. Well, we want to try to understand the implication of this figure,
Exactly.
so they are not just numbers.
Exactly.
We have Mr. Mustafa Wahab, an analyst with Chapel Hill, to help us do that. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Wahab.
Good morning, Ini. Good morning, Ladi. It's good to be with you this morning.
Good morning.
Good to have you too. So 1.87 trillion naira deficit in the second quarter when economies are supposed to have been reopened. How do we explain this?
Ini, I like how passionate you are with the size of the deficit.
It's Nigeria. It's my country.
But honestly, I see your passion. Honestly, it's not as bad as it looks. I mean, at least when compared to the previous quarter, obviously last year. I think last year we had a deficit of over 3 trillion naira, and now we're down to 1.8 trillion. I mean, which obviously is an improvement. If you compare to Q1 2021, I think we're down by about 2% from roughly 2 trillion, right? And obviously, I mean, you've rightly mentioned it, crude oil, which still accounts for over 80% of Nigeria's, exports, is largely the key driver of this sort of improvement. So first of all, let's just basically break the number down, right? What we saw for Q2 21 was that export actually grew by over 100%, year on year. And imports, also grew by about 67%, but obviously that's a lot slower compared to that of exports. And this is clearly, driven by crude oil. If you recall last year, I think we entered a pandemic period where, obviously the impact of which led to collapse in oil prices. And since then up until now, given what OPEC has done in the last 1 year, we've seen oil prices recovered. I think it's up by anywhere between 45 to 50% on average, to around $69 per barrel, right? And the impact of this obviously supported crude oil export and obviously overall value of exports. And if you check production, I think production is down by about 2% compared to last year, but that sort of sharp increase in oil price was enough to neuter the impact, right? So like I said, I mean, it's more or less an improvement from where we're coming from. And going forward, what we think is that, what we're seeing for OPEC at least is that they are now, starting to gradually raise, production benchmark, at least, for all the, members of the cartel, right? So the impact of this will probably continue to support, Nigeria's exports, compared to where we are currently. And so, I mean, our views in-house in Chapel is that we'll probably continue to see that sort of, trade deficit to continue to shrink, through the rest of the year.
Okay, Mustafa, let's look at other exports. Now, agricultural goods export was up 29.95%. Even raw material goods export recorded an increase of 49.98%. Is this just a base year effect or a true increase on the country's export?
Yeah, so I won't be particularly excited about the numbers coming from agri, And obviously, you've mentioned it clearly. It's more or less a case of base year. You remember last year, we were strictly on lockdown. I think Q2 2020 was even the heart of, the pandemic, especially in Nigeria. Nothing was coming in, nothing was going out. So the impact of this drove significant deceleration as far as export is concerned. So the numbers you are seeing coming out this quarter is more or less a base effect. But beyond that, obviously, you are all aware that, Naira has faced significant amount of pressure this year. So that sort of devaluation impact on the value of export too must have contributed to that, significant jump, across the key line item. So I would just, for me personally, I'll wait for the CBN's number to come out, which is strictly, FX, or that is strictly reported in US dollars. I think that would more or less paint, a better picture compared to what we're seeing now. So beyond the impact of base effect, that devaluation of the naira over the last 1 year must have also contributed to that significant expansion that we're seeing in the value of export across the key lines. So yes, I would wait for the dollar figure from the CBN before I read significant meaning into the numbers.
Okay, so we don't really have a lot to celebrate, even though we see a lot of increase. And another thing that worries me, like you said, I'm passionate about Nigeria. Like you noted, 80% of our trade is still around oil. Even when we talk about agriculture, they are raw materials. We are not adding a lot of value. Are we making any progress in this talk about diversification, or is it just on paper?
Ini, let me give you some sort of comfort, right? So first off is that Dangote refinery is coming probably, by the end of 2022, right? And for all of the stories that we've been hearing about the refinery is that it is huge enough, about 650,000 barrels per day capacity. I think the refinery is huge enough to supply domestic markets and obviously export, the balance as well. So, right. So by the time we start to see that sort of, projects coming in, we can start to talk about how, export base in Nigeria will be diversified, essentially away from crude oil. But beyond that, if you think about companies like Dangote Cement, BUA Cement, one of the key focus right now for them is that they want to start to export clinker, into neighboring West African countries. You check the data of the trade data that we saw for Q2. What you see is that it is so disappointing that only about 10% of Nigeria's exports, goes to the whole of African countries, compared to close to 36% for Asia, about 35% for Europe. So, a lot still has to be done, when it comes to doing a lot of businesses with other West African countries. Hence the reason why, companies like Dangote Industry Groups, they are, taking the lead in leading this sort of initiative of pushing a lot of products, to other West African countries. Because, in-house in Chapuyo, we know that it is a lot cheaper for, countries like Ghana or Benin Republic or Niger to import clinker straight from Nigeria than what they will get from, Asian countries where they are currently importing. Because in Nigeria, we are sitting on gold, right? And the gold is basically, availability of clinker that can potentially supply domestic market and obviously export market. So going forward, in the next 2 to 3 years, some of the nice projects that is being done domestically would sort of, start to, show some sort of positive numbers or positive results in ensuring that this huge amount of deficit that we're seeing currently will probably continue to, shrink going forward.
We'll certainly look forward to that. Very 2 to 3 years, not a long time to wait. I can wait for 2 to 3 years.
I'll wait.
And hopefully we will see the result by then. Well, thank you so much, Mustafa Wahab, analyst with Chapel Hill Denham, for shedding light on the foreign trade statistics for the second quarter of 2021. So we'll move on now. And there's a report saying that 98% of Nigerians operating in the informal economy pay taxes daily. And yeah, this is opposed to the majority notion that a larger portion of population of Nigerians do not pay taxes.
So where's all that money going to?
How are they paying it? I think that's another question. So we'll have that conversation with Joachim Makebong, a senior analyst with SBM Intelligence. Intelligence. But that will be after the break, so do stay with us and join us in this conversation.
Welcome back to our next conversation now on tax payment culture. We have Joachim Ebong, senior analyst with SBM Intelligence, joining us now. Great to have you on the program. Good morning.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
All right, so looking at your report, it says in Lagos now that some bus drivers pay as much as 3,000 naira a day in taxes to different groups. Can you please explain this?
Yeah, so if you sit in a bus, a downfall bus, going from maybe, let me say, Bagada, for example, to Obalende or elsewhere, at some points they have to stop, and someone jumps in the bus and then
marks their bus,
and it gives them a number and so on. If they stand at one spot and they load, the buses that stand in one space in one spot to load, before they move, they typically also pay those people, and for as many times as they load, they have complete loads of people.
It's called Owo loading.
Owo loading, there is, yes, so there's Owo loading, there's Owo council, and so on. So by the time you add all those many things up, in some parts of Lagos, you do get up to that figure. It's something that we have, the informal economy is something that we're looking closely at SBM Intelligence. And we decided, because we knew that the common notion of Nigerians not paying taxes has been false, and has been false for a long time. But we decided to really get to the depth of it, understand the depth and the breadth of the tax burden borne by the informal economy. And our report says that tax burden is pretty significant.
98% you placed it.
Yes.
Oh, 98% of... No, but you have just given an example of a bus. I mean, there are groups of people who do not use public transportation. But you are now saying it's the informal sector generally. So how do you now make it 98? How do you get this 98% of the informal sector?
Yes. So that's a good question. What we did was we went across about a dozen cities, places like Ibadan, Kano, Enugu, Lagos, and so on. So various cities, and we made sure that we covered every geopolitical zone to give that a good spread as well. And we also did not just bus drivers, but vulcanizers, hairdressers, and other business owners in that, and that is how we came up with that figure. We understand that the figure is going to shock some people, it's going to surprise some people.
Yeah, because I mean, you're talking about almost everybody, 98%.
Yes, precisely. So we had to
100%.
make sure that research was as in-depth as possible in order to get the accurate picture. There are some people who do not pay some of these taxes because they are able to dodge one way or the other, but there are not many of them. Even the people who sell by the roadside, that little space they occupy on the ledges there, right? They have to pay for every space.
Yes, I do know. I mean, when you go to the market.
In the market,
yes,
outside the market, so they have to pay all of that. Nothing is free. Nothing is free.
But this is the scenario I know about Lagos. Is that the way it is in other states? So
yes, absolutely. Absolutely, that is it. At all the major markets, the pattern is the same. However, what happens and what is different is that the amount that they pay may be less, and the number of times they pay may also be less, right? Again, in keeping with perhaps various income levels, various levels of business and so on. But the pattern is the same. In some places, they pay about 2 times a day. In some places, they pay higher, they pay less. But nearly everybody pays.
So who accounts for?
Where does it go to?
Where does it go to?
And that's a fantastic question. You see, in our line of work, you get to find out the kinds of things that some of these union bosses are up to, the kind of things they do with money. And a lot of that money does not go to state coffers. What happens is that the market associations, NURTW, and the various people that run the various parks in the various cities are the people who take most of that money. Now, there is a lot of room here for state governments to actually insist, state and local governments to actually insist and put up structures by which they can have this money.
What do they provide, without collecting all this money?
And that's another good question. And we had to ask that to the people who we spoke to. It's not a lot, actually, The people who tend to provide the most with regard to services back to those who pay are in the market associations, with regard to waste disposal, perhaps some issues, trying to solve some issues with electricity and so on. But I think when you come out of the market association space and you talk to people who do either Okada, bus drivers, or organizers, and so on, what they get back for the money that they pay is not a lot at all.
And all these things, I mean, when you talk to some of them, they connect it to the local government. It's not just the market association. I mean, you see some of those guys who stand on the road and they say they're from the local government.
with their little ID cards.
Yeah, so little or green ID card with paper like that. So it's still connected to the government.
Yes. So again, you want to understand that at local level in Nigeria, there are various forces that are at play, particularly political forces. Now, what happens is that those political stakeholders at local level, at world level, right? They also take their own share of whatever proceeds they get, and then they translate, and then they give the rest to the government. It is the as we say, the price of doing business at local political level. So they take their cuts, they remit some of it to the state governments, and so on. And I think that the way by which these taxes are collected is also a really important part of why they are able to do what they do.
Yeah.
So is there a way to cleanse the system? Because obviously, eventually, when we complain or we talk about inflation, prices are going up, because it passes back to the consumer at the end of the day.
Yes, it does.
You and I pay for it. And is there a way to cleanse the system from your findings?
Yes, so I think that there are a couple of things that can be done immediately. First, everybody who pays taxes anywhere in Nigeria should have that amount against his or her name. Okay. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the taxes should not be...
serious record keeping.
Yes, serious record keeping. Precisely, there you go.
Even on the national level, we're talking about data.
Precisely, and that is the work of government at federal level, at state level, and local level. Once you begin to attach the taxes people pay to their names or to their phone numbers, what then happens is that, you see, there's a transparency there. And you are then able to determine how much the person has paid over so and so and so time. The second main point is that those taxes should not be arbitrary, but they should be as a percentage of income. So ideally, I don't know why anybody should pay more than 30% of their income to anybody in total. And I think that the kind of amounts that we are talking about easily go beyond that figure in some respects. So one, arbitrary. Two, it needs to be much more transparent. And then, you also have to get people to see the benefits by which of
But I mean, some of these people in the informal sector, it's difficult to determine their income.
That's another one.
I mean, it's not stable.
Yeah. Again, yes, it's not stable, but typically there are averages. So, for example, instead of maybe this particular month, you can use an average of the last 3 months or so, the last 3 or 4 months, to determine how much they should pay in taxes, and then that can then be taken and then be done in a way by which they can have more disposable income left over and they can do more with it, instead of simply giving money to people who
your solution sounds really interesting, but so far-fetched when we look at the realities in Nigeria. Because, I mean, we're talking of, for instance, the vaccine issue now, and we're asking, do we have, the right data, enough data? Now we're going to the informal sector that is...
which is...
I think that when we talk so much about revenue mobilization, expanding the tax net, and so on, you see, these things require work. You cannot use press conferences to expand taxnet. Right. You cannot use PowerPoint slides to expand taxnet. You have to go to the streets
and do the work,
and ensure that what people pay is linked to their names, linked to whatever ID they have, and then you can then see the pipeline of that money entering government coffers. Because without that, I mean, you cannot just have reforms in press conferences. That doesn't work.
On the pages of newspaper and on television. Thank you so much, Joachim, for sharing your findings with us. Very interesting one there. 98% of participants in the informal sector pay taxes. And this is well against the majority notion. Thank you so much. And we look forward to when we can actually implement some of those
See some
solutions
progress. Yeah, sure.
and make progress in our tax.
Thank you.
Well, we'll take a break now. When we come back, the issue of crude thefts or even knowing our daily consumption of oil, those are issues we'll discuss next. Do join us. It's Business Morning on Channels Television. You're welcome back. Well, according to NNPC, Nigeria is losing an average of 200,000 barrels of its crude oil production daily to theft. The GMD of the corporation has expressed its frustrations over this. Why does it seem to be persisting, and how can it be contained? Well, we'll discuss this and more with the president of Petroleum and Natural Gas Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, Mr. Festus Osifo, who's joining us this morning. Good to have you,
Morning.
Mr. Osifo.
Great to have you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Yeah, thank you
So
so much.
one
for
of
having
many,
me.
many issues
Yeah.
in the oil and gas industry is the issue of crude theft.
Yeah.
And even the GMD has said, well, they're working on it, but they haven't been able to find a way to solve this problem. And it is eating deep into our, our production, our revenue, and yet we're complaining and all that. Is there a way to solve this at all?
Yes, the issue of crude oil theft, it's actually a big issue in the oil and gas industry. And that issue is much more predominant in the onshore production facilities, because these facilities are located in land, and you now need to pipe the crude oil that is produced from the facilities via the pipelines to a flow station where you can now be talking about export. So most of these pipelines are not far from a surface. So in most cases, you do have this pipeline being vandalized. And when you have such vandalization, it results into crude oil loss. And these losses is quite enormous. Just as the GMD puts it, it's something that is really enormous in such a way that in the oil and gas industry today, most of the IOCs, they spend a large amount of their money in trying to protect these pipelines. So it's really a big challenge. It's something that is relatively facing the industry today. And I think that with all stakeholders, coming together, and with the resolve of the security. Again, the oil and gas industry is operating in Nigeria. We know the security challenges that we face in Nigeria. So we are not operating in isolation. So it's a general national problem that we must sit down to tackle.
Right.
But you don't have such majorly in the deep offshore areas where tankers do come in to load the crude and export abroad. So that is actually the major difference.
But you still have pipeline vandalism in the residential, close to the residential areas.
Yes.
And it's all part of people trying to steal the petroleum product.
Yes. The crude oil vandalism today, we have the petroleum products, which is like, the PMS, the DPK, some are still being piped through the pipelines, but majorly you have the crude that you transport from the production facility to the flow stations. So along that flow, so some of these pipelines do pass through some residential areas. So along that line, that is where you have this challenge majorly.
So what's the measurement infrastructure like? At some point you will have, some kind of measurement, process to know, what is being produced, and, that should actually help, in solving this issue.
I know. Measurement infrastructure really will not be able to solve it, because even if you measure from point one that you are producing, let's assume 50,000 barrels per day, and you feed it into the pipeline, as you pass it through the pipeline, what you are now receiving at the end of the day may become 40,000 barrels. So along the line, you may have some losses, and majority of these losses is as a result of vandalization. So even if you have measurement from point A and measurement at point B, it will not necessarily solve the problem. What will solve the problem is that, one, we must have we must deploy technology. Technology is the key, yeah. And most of our pipelines, we should lay them, you know, a bit deeper into the ground, because if you have a pipeline that is just like 2 meters from the surface, you know, these the thieves, so to say, could bust the pipeline because it's just relatively closer to the surface. So that is just one of the challenges that we quite have in the oil and gas industry today. Today, the issue of security is really a huge one. That you have a particular IOC that have close to 300 security men, over 200 army that are guiding their onshore installations. You have NCDC and all.
They have to pay for.
Yes, you pay for them. You know, and that is one thing that the PIB was not able to address. Because, like as we have said, the PIA actually, yeah, you know, because we had PIB for 20 years, so we keep saying PIB. The PIA was not able to address. Because if you look at it clearly, there's a particular IOC that budgeted in 2020 $30 million for security. $30 million. The $30 million, you have some of these amounts budgeted to security vessels. You have some of these amounts budgeted to manning those security vessels, fueling those security vessels, as well as some other amount as well budgeted to the Nigerian Army, mobilizing men and women of the Nigerian Army. So at the end of the day, it's really affecting the industry greatly. Okay, then we also have the issue of kidnap, for example. I mean, as part of the security issues in the oil and gas. It was reported that in 2020, 258 personnel in the oil and gas industries, you know, were actually kidnapped in the year 2020. And about 21 of these people as well, they were also killed. Yeah, both the employees of the IOCs and producing companies and their contracted personnel. So this is actually the report that came from 2020. So it's something that we really need to address.
It's another major thing, discussion that goes on in the oil and gas industry, which the PIA is supposed to, but I mean, I don't think it really takes care of it, is the issue of subsidy. Yeah. It's been a lingering conversation. When we look at the pros and the cons, the people say we need this subsidy so that at least it will reduce inflation, because once the price of petrol goes up, then everything goes up.
Yeah, true.
But the government is also saying if we free this money, it will help develop infrastructure. What is Pengason's stand on this?
Yes, our stand has been very, very clear that when you are about removing subsidy, first of all, you must think about the masses. We have said that we are not against subsidy removal, but try and make our refineries functional, so that when you remove subsidy, the dollar component more or less will be eliminated. Because, I mean, you just read the report when I was listening to you a while ago, that we spent about 1.87 trillion in Q2. As trade deficit. We had a trade deficit of 1.87 trillion. The major reason we have that trade deficit is that we import PMS. If you check NIETI's report, that in 2019, NNPC, we imported about 20 billion liters of PMS. So when you check the amount of money it costs the nation to import PMS, that is one of the reasons we are in that kind of trade deficit. And again, if you import PMS, what do happen again is that this PMS is bought in USD. Yeah. So you are weakening your currency. So these are the major challenges. Effect, yes, it's a ripple effect. Yeah. So what we have said is that let us fix our refineries. And thank God today there is a lot of traction from the government in getting the refineries fixed. Yeah. So when the refineries are fixed, when we are producing, like when the 3 refineries are fixed, rather 4, because we have 2 in Port Harcourt. When you fix those refineries, we will be producing nothing less than 20 to 25 million liters locally. So if you add that to the Dangote refinery, that could give you something about 60, 70 million liters. So when you produce locally, then you can now say, let us go into full-scale deregulation. If we deregulate today, what we are simply doing is that we are exporting jobs. So the Pengasan position has been, let us develop our value chain. Today, we know how much, the oil and gas industry contributes less than 10% to our GDP. But if we develop the value chain, I could tell you that the oil and gas could be contributing nothing less than 30% to our GDP.
Right.
So that is what we have been advocating for over the years.
Okay, and you know, the world is moving towards cleaner energy right now. How is Pengasyn preparing for this?
Yes, that was our advocacy when we were in the National Assembly. We advocated greatly before the National Assembly that the PIA must contain insertions whereby we will start doing research into new energy. We will start, today we know clearly that a lot of companies that are supposed to invest in the oil and gas, in Nigeria oil and gas industry, the IOCs, they have made a lot of policy statements on how they are divesting from the so-called oil and gas industry into new energies. So we must be ready and we must be prepared. So we advocated that, and that's why part of our advocacy that we are also going to seek before the National Assembly is that the 30% that you are keeping for frontier explorations, why won't you move this 30% into development of renewables? Because that is where the world is going. If you look at the recent report, the World Bank said that they will no longer invest or release money for oil and gas development anymore, but that in the developing nation, they could consider gas because gas is cleaner. Then if you look at all the reports from the UK to the Netherlands to Canada, they have all said that between 2030 and 2035, that they are going to cut down carbon emission between 50 to about 78%. So this is quite huge. And in cutting down these, then you know that it's going to affect the oil and gas industry. So our advocacy before the National Assembly was that a chunk amount of money should be set aside for development of renewables, because that is where the world is tilting towards.
But I mean, you're saying this after the PIB has been made the PIA. One would have expected you to speak to this before it was passed into law.
Like as I've said, that before the National Assembly, during the public hearing. So during the public hearing, it was still PIB. It wasn't PIA then. So in our position paper, that was our position. The position paper, I can share it with you. So that was what we advocated before the National Assembly. But you know, there are multi-stakeholders with diverse interests and all that. Right. But now that it has been passed, we will advocate for an amendment. Let's assume we operate the law for the first 1-2 years. But after then, we are going to advocate strongly for the amendment so that Nigeria will be ready. Because the last report from World Economic Forum said that Nigeria, we are just about 35% are ready for the new energies that are coming. And that is very, very abysmal and is very, very poor. So we need to be set. 35%? Yeah, I mean, that was the report from the World Economic Forum. Right. So we can't really fault it.
For me, we always talk about subsidy now, and for Pengasyn saying, because everybody is scared when the oil industry goes on strike, it affects everything. So I'm sure that's part of the considerations of the government, and subsidy keeps, and then the government keeps complaining we don't have enough money, and we keep missing out on infrastructure that we should have had, and we still keep paying subsidy. We don't know when our rehabilitation of refineries will be.
But there's a lot of work going on in that refineries today. I can attest to that because the Port Harcourt refinery, for example, they have concluded the 3D laser scanning and every other activities are going on. Then the Warri and the Kaduna was just sanctioned recently by the Federal Executive Council. So we are fully in support of that because we think that when the refineries are functional and when other value chains in the oil and gas industry is developed, we think clearly that is going to boost the economy.
Some action going on.
Yes, certainly.
Okay, and we do hope those actions will be implemented, will bear fruit in the short run.
Yes,
Thank you so much, President of Pengasyn, Mr. Festus Osifo, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
We'll just switch over to the markets now. Will has been standing by to tell us how the markets was last week. Hello, Will.
Good morning, Ini.
Good morning.
Last week opened on a bright note with news of increase in the foreign reserves. Our foreign reserves is now at $34 billion due to the rally in oil prices as well as the $3.35 billion special drawing rights from the IMF. But ironically, the Naira depreciated in the trading windows. For the week ended September the 3rd, the total turnover of transactions stood at about $1 billion, representing an increase of 11.31% from the previous day's transactions. At the investors and at the investors and exporters window, a total value of $629.34 million was traded. However, the value of transactions fell by 4.86%. And at the NAFEX window, we see similarly the Naira closed flat against the dollar at 411 Naira 29 kobo to a dollar, representing 1 kobo loss when compared to 411 Naira 28 kobo recorded in the previous trading week. Naira fell to an all-time low at the parallel market due to demand pressure. However, analysts believe the local currency is expected to ease on the black market in the coming week after the CBN orders banks to publish on their websites names of individuals that violate rules on forex transactions. Well, to talk more about this, we have Bosun Obembe, a fixed income dealer at Access Bank. Good morning, Bosun.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Bosun, we've seen a drop in the Naira at the parallel market. It came to an all-time low of 530 Naira to a dollar. What's driving this? What are the factors driving this?
Okay, thank you. So just like you mentioned, there was a letter by CBN to banks to publish names of defaulters. So I believe the rate at the parallel market is not something within the CBN control, given that is not the official market where transactions are executed. And the volume of transactions in that market is quite small. So, but the positive side is, if you look at our reserve, we have it increasing 2 months high of 34.2 billion. And with that, CBN is in more comfortable position, especially defend the Naira and meet import obligation. Last week, like you know, CBN has continued to sustain its intervention to foreign portfolio investors. So last week, CBN added more foreign portfolio investors to the list of backlogs they are clearing. And with the rising reserve, so I believe it's just a matter of time the rate to actually will come down to a reasonable level.
Okay, so analysts are of the view, I want to know what you think, that while the current accretion and the reserves could help with the short-term appreciation in the Naira against the dollar, there could still be a need to address the issue of FX liquidity in the long term. What's your take?
Yes, I believe the long term, we still have Naira. We still need the foreign portfolio investors actually to bring with the Naira, to bring the dollar. If you notice, in July, we had OMO auction, and towards the end of August, CBN started weekly OMO sales again. So, and with the rate on the long end at 10.1, I would believe this will entice more foreign investors to actually come into the country to invest. And with our inflation rate coming down as well, and the GDP figure being on a positive note, 5.01, so I believe this will bring in more foreign portfolio investors to actually come into the market. But like you said, until we have a lot of foreign investors coming back into our market, and CBN has actually started in the confidence building strategy by clearing their FX backlogs. So I believe by the time they start coming back, the Naira will actually come to a reasonable level, and we'll have this supply that we used to have in the high earning window. Even if you look at the turnover in the high earning window month on month, we've seen an increase of about 500 million month on month. Even the week on week, we saw close to about 500 million increase in the turnover. So this is a positive for the currency.
Thank you so much, Bosun Obembe, fixed income dealer at Access Bank, for your insights on the program. Ini, I want to close up with saying that the markets and the equities we had a bearish week, 0.57%. And we're hoping that we will start off this week on a very good note. But this is not very encouraging, but we are hoping that this week we get a green note.
We certainly hope so, because I remember the first day in the month of September, we started with the bear, and that was not a good sign. But, well, we hope that our fortune will change within the week. Thank you so much, Will. So we'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll head straight to London, where Juliana is standing by at our London studios.
Stay connected to the world with Channels TV Podcast and get all the trending stories. Simply log on to channelstv.com, click on podcast, select the program of your choice, and listen. Our podcast is available on Apple, Google, and Spotify. Tap the expertise you trust. Touch the stories that touch you. Anytime, anywhere.
You're welcome back. Well, we head to London now. Juliana, good morning.
Good morning, Annie.
Yeah, so the shortage in supply of manpower and seems very far from being over. We now hear the Confederation of British Industry saying that this may last for 2 years. That's scary.
Yeah, it is increasingly worrying. I think Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is certainly going to have a lot to deal with this week. Parliament returns from the summer recess. And apart from Afghanistan and Brexit, shortages is a major issue. I can attest to it myself. I was in a shopping centre on the weekend, and you are starting to see that the shelves aren't as full as they were in the CBI, which is Britain's biggest industry group. They have written an open letter warning that if the problem is left to resolve itself, then it could last for about 2 years. Now, this is affecting supply issues across the country. So it's not just low-level positions such as front-facing hospitality. This is also affecting high-skilled engineers. And we've seen it with the data. We're seeing that unemployment is historically low. Vacancies are historically quite high. And now one of the issues is about Brexit and the fact that lots of EU workers, they went home during the pandemic. They're struggling to come back. The vast majority of these workers were HGV drivers. About 90,000 are missing, and it is affecting all parts of the economy. I think when it comes to the economy, two issues that the CBI mentioned. Number one is hospitality. There are several restaurants, not just in the capital, London, but across Britain that are now starting to choose whether or not they have a lunch service or a dinner service because they just don't have the staff to fill both. Also, as well, lots of hotels are now not advertising all of their rooms because they just don't have the capacity, whether it's the food or the staff, to be able to offer all of them. So it is a major issue. The government seem to be sticking to their top line, which is if you want to fill these vacancies, you need to hire British staff, that they are not going to loosen the new migration rules. But that's what they're saying now. Let's just see, because lots and lots of retailers and business leaders are saying, this is just completely unsustainable.
Well, let's hope that they do compromise or at least soften their stance a bit. Well, just briefly now, Goldman Sachs is supposed to list today. What's the expectation?
Yeah, this is really an interesting story for the elite amongst us. Goldman Sachs, the Wall Street Investment Bank, has an alternative asset management arm called Petershill. They are mulling a London Stock Exchange float, which would value the company at about £5 billion. Now, Petershill, they have minority stakes in about 19 firms to the tune of £187 billion. And this is all really about Goldman Sachs diversifying how they earn their revenue. They kind of want to steer away from volatility markets like bond buying and equities to wealth management, where they know they're going to get a regular income. So more on that story when it becomes available, Innie.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Juliana. I'll talk to you at 1:30.
Thank you.
So let's move over to crypto now. Ladi had a great weekend, I think almost green Friday, a green weekend, and now a green Monday.
Yes, the market was green, and all those traders there having a good time. Bitcoin over 50K. It's all green in the market right now. Only actually Infinity in the red. Looking at this chart, but the fear greed index you see is at 79 points. That's extreme greed. Let's take a look at.
Okay, Ladi. I think they said the investors I think your traders, like you said, that they had a good time. I think you have a problem with your microphone or something like that. So are we good? Okay, so I think Ladi is having a bit of issues with his microphone. But he was trying to say that the market, the investors are in the crypto market smiled all through the weekend and smiling today, Monday. Well, that's kind of opposite of what Will had to report from the equities and the equities market. But we do hope that very soon that the equities will smile or be green, just like the crypto market. Well, I guess that's where we'll say that's it on the program. It's been an interesting one, and I hope it was worth your while talking about the issues in the oil and gas industry. And do you pay your tax, and is it captured? Well, very interesting conversations that we had today. We have more interesting one coming to you tomorrow. But of course, before then, 1:30, we're going to have Business Incorporated. Do join us then for more from the world of business. I'm Ini John Mekwa.